All right.
Awesome. And apparently they're booking Brunson as Sonya now.
Oh, I saw that. Derek Brunson is getting so hyped up about knocking himself out. He's like, so I'm not saying I'm confident he'll beat Adesanya necessarily, because he is by far the best wrestler and most powerful wrestler that Adesanya's faced, but also Derek Brunson is exactly the fucking dude to get hilariously knocked out by Adesanya. And I really hope that happens. I now live for seeing Derek Brunson either knock out or get knocked out in about a minute and a half per fight.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can't really accuse, it's always the thing that amuses me is that, Derek Brunson was considered to be incredibly boring.
Yeah.
You can't really accuse him of that anymore. He is not boring.
Nope. Yes. Well, the thing is, he's like Jekyll and Hyde. It's because, he is, there might be an interesting topic in that, he's the anti-Poirier, where he is just totally a slave to his insecurities and all of the worries and fears he seems to have when he's in the cage. And so, he's either a prisoner of them and he can't do shit, or he's fleeing from them at top speed, running forward, throwing punches. There is absolutely no mitigation to Derek Brunson's game, which is what makes him such an insane fighter to watch. Also, he does have that thing where every shot that hits him is the cleanest shot he's ever been hit by.
Yeah.
Which,
It's just a real shame we're never going to get. Maybe we will get it. Hopefully he moves up.
Huh.
Why doesn't he move up?
Yeah, why the fuck doesn't anyone move up?
Yeah. Tell Derek Brunson to move up, then we can get Derek Brunson and Anthony Smith. I need that fight.
Oh my god.
Can you imagine?
Shit. I need to see that so badly.
Just be like a portal to insecurity world that just open up in the middle of the cage.
I almost wish it was a kind of fight where they are both prisoners to their insecurity, and they just stand there talking shit and getting mad at each other.
Yeah. But I just want them to do it for a really long time, and then for them both to just sprint at each other, flailing as hard as humanly possible, and then just teleport into the insecurity dimension.
Just imagine
just vanish as they clash in the center of the cage.
They clash. There's a huge cloud of dust, and when it settles, Jessica I is left standing in the middle of the octagon. The insecurity
it's just
smasher.
That's how they're born.
Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch, here with Philly Mac. Phil, it was suggested that, well, first of all, some people made the errant suggestion that we should remove Patrick Wyman's name from the graphic, saying
you mean opposed as to just crossing it out in MS Paint?
Yeah,
as I believe it has been for at least one of the shows.
Yeah, so someone suggested we should actually remove it. Another suggestion, this is from the YouTube comments, was that it should going forward say Dr. Phil Mackenzie, which I do think is a pretty good idea. Because I think it might really genuinely upset Pat.
Yeah, just winding up Pat one last time.
So I think that's what we'll do. But also Philly Mac is an option. I'm still trying to think of what I should, what our relationship should really be. How professional, how friendly, how laid back. But we can chop all that up and figure it out over the course of today's episode of Heavy Hands. Welcome again to Heavy Hands. I think I already said that. But, man, we have good-ass fights to talk to you all about today. We really, really do. Last weekend was UFC on Fox something or other, a.k.a. UFC Calgary, a.k.a. Eddie Alvarez versus Dustin Poirier 2, and its undercard. And it was pretty sensational. The whole card was acceptable, was fine. There were good moments sprinkled throughout. But really, as we said last week in the preview, it was about the top three fights. Ioane and Jacek and Jose Aldo, two champions, both regarded as the best to ever do it in their respective divisions. Came in, both of them on 2-fight losing streaks, having lost their last 2 title fights. And both of them came in and fought top contenders on the, in the effort to get back in the winning column. Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez had their rematch in the main event. All three of those fights felt very important. They were all very nerve-wracking, and there were some savage fucking finishes and wild exchanges involved in a lot of these fights. But really the focus for today's episode, Phil, is the card that's happening next week. And how do you feel about this one overall? What do you feel about the makeup of this card? How hyped? What's the hype meter? What's the Philly Mac hype meter? What's it read?
It is a strange card. That's what I'm going to say about it. Is that the top two fights are amazing.
Yeah.
And they are not going to land well with the paying public whatsoever.
No. They are, by the way, Dillashaw Garbrandt 2 and Johnson Cejudo 2. Two very interesting rematches, unless you are most of the people in the world who don't give a shit.
Yeah. So both of these rematches are between top-shelf MMA athletes, incredibly impressive fighters that have been, in most cases, improving fight to fight, something we can talk about a bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And then the card falls off a cliff until we have Cub Swanson and Renato Moicano and Pedro Munoz and Brett Johns, and then it falls back off a cliff again.
Yep. There's a couple of sleepers on here that I like, but there's very little on this card, other than the top two fights I would expect anyone else to like. And unfortunately, one of those top two fights, I can no longer say I expect or even hope that people will like, because just people now have a mission, like as if they're afraid of being proven wrong. Now they will not support Demetrius Johnson. They will not come around on flyweight, goddammit, all right? Because you can't fucking make them. So, yeah, no one's going to care. They had an amazing pre-taped interview segment with both TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt on last weekend's broadcast. Which,
as people said, one of the few pre-fight beef interviews that makes you less interested.
Absolutely.
In the fight.
I'm a fan of John Anik. I think he does really good work, but I was tempted online to offer a little correction when he described this as one of the best rivalries in MMA today. And I'm like, yeah, hard to argue with that. And then he revealed that they were going to show the two of them talking to each other. I was like, maybe you don't want to, just don't hype up how this is really almost as good as rivalries get in the sport, and then let us hear them talk. Because it really does kind of soften the effect a little bit, I think. To hear Garbrandt being the meatiest of meatheads, and Dillashaw being just like just notably smarter enough, but not smart enough to resist arguing with anything that Cody says.
Yeah,
so
they really need Dominic Cruz to do the whole Serrano de Bergerac thing.
Absolutely.
Have him, and maybe just someone else for one of the other dudes. But for at least one of these guys, they just need someone who can actually do this, just hiding somewhere and giving them the appropriate insults to deliver.
Yes.
Because that was just... Bro, I'm going to knock you out, bro. Bro, I totally knocked you out last time, bro.
Boy,
well, and that's not going to happen again because I'm really good.
Yeah, I thought having like some new specific parameters set, like one of these guys has beaten the other, and then since we've covered it all, it's all well-worn, well-trod ground, removing the specifics of the whole team alpha male beef. Neither of those changes made this any more interesting to listen to. Or bearable, because just these two together. But the fight is awesome. I mean, the first matchup between these two was, for those who don't recall, it was crazy. It lasted for just about a round and a half, and both guys got knocked down. Dillashaw just at the end of the first came back, adjusted really well, knocked Garbrandt out in the second. It's just kind of weird, to evaluate this as a rematch because Cody Garbrandt has a very strange MMA career. where it's a lot of quick finishes. It's almost all first-round knockouts leading up to the fight with Dominic Cruz. And then it's what I suspect, and we can talk about this, what I suspect to be a really an unexpectedly forgiving style matchup in Dominic Cruz for Cody Garbrandt, and then a fight with TJ Dillashaw in which Garbrandt has one moment of tremendous success and one moment of tremendous failure. So the interesting thing about this matchup for me is, of course, not the trash talking between the two men. I hope both of them never speak again, if I'm honest. But how does Cody Garbrandt adjust to what happened in this fight? I will say, I have more confidence in the likes of TJ Dillashaw to adjust. I think that's kind of the type of fighter he is. That is how he came back into the first matchup. I have no idea if Cody Garbrandt can adjust to the adjustment that Dillashaw made against him. No clue.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that was kind of the thing that I was thinking watching tape in the run-up to this, because I'm getting a little bit of a Kelvin Gastelum vibe from Cody.
Right.
In that you look at him, and the first time you're like, wow, look at that 3-2. That is incredible. And then the second time you go, what? That is a really fast 3-2. He is really good at that. And after a while, you're just like, does he have more than a very fast counter right hand and left hook?
And it is a
which
question
are normally
worth
thrown
asking.
One after the other. And I'm not sure if that question has been answered, really.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, the Dominic Cruz fight is still tremendously impressive. It's still a great showing, especially considering how inexperienced Garbrandt was at the time. But you go back and watch it, and it really is Dominic Cruz mostly running into the 2-3 over and over.
2-3, yeah.
And not being able really to, like, how many of Dominic Cruz's great performances, how many of them feature him in a matchup in which he feels compelled to come forward the whole time?
Yeah.
Any of them?
And it was more just an issue of the fact that Dominic Cruz was now in a fight with someone who had a comparable frame to him, who was also just a much faster and more efficient puncher, he would essentially just wait for Cruz to take those, because Cruz has his approach steps where he'll take, he'll either stutter step or take one huge step in and then angle off in one direction. And all Garbrandt did was stand there, track him, watch him, wait for him to stop, and then start to angle off and then just punch him.
It was like a single layered fight from Cody Garbrandt. There was like more or less the same kind of engagement kept happening again and again because Garbrandt made the very simple and a very good choice against a guy like Cruz, though I don't know if he can make many other choices, to be honest. It may just be the way that he's best at fighting. But he just didn't give any information away for free. He was extremely patient. He knew he wanted Dominic to lead, as I think he really wants everyone he fights to lead. He wants to counter them with those really, really quick hands. And Dominic was not, like, Dominic didn't know another way of fighting to not lead. His style is all about giving his opponent lots of information. And so I think his natural response to someone who was just as it was against Uriah Faber, another relatively slow-paced fighter who was also looking for counters, was to then just try to overload them with information. And that meant coming forward and engaging and creating the engagements a little more. All Cody did was just use his footwork whenever Dominic tried his footwork. He would just move away and maintain the distance until Dominic had to reach. And in the meantime, he wasn't letting Dominic lay a hand on him or catch him with little kicks, even like at the end of the foot. Anytime that Dominic had any success, that is when Garbrandt would hit him back. And so it just ended up being like Cruz lunging and reaching and not exactly sure where Cody was at any given moment, not really able to sense the range between them. And meanwhile, Cody was just there in control and working very little, like just didn't have to work hard or do much, and especially really didn't have to change anything up as the fight went on. It was just Cruz just kind of doubled down and tried to do all the stuff he did in the first couple rounds harder as the fight progressed. and fell more and more, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as he decided that he had to come forward, then he had to come forward harder and harder with more and more pressure as the fight went on. And that's the thing, is like Dillashaw doesn't have to do that. He clearly didn't in the first fight. His main adjustment to Cody Garbrandt's counterpunching was to just stay at longer range, because Cody wanted to skip back and move his feet and draw TJ into overextending. His plan was just to stay at longer range and just blast him with kicks. And it worked fine.
Yeah, so, and that was the interesting thing, even in the Cruz fight, is that Cruz's biggest success in that fight came in the 5th round. And that was when he gave up on, he mostly gave up on kind of angling on Garbrandt. He mostly gave up on his idea of, jumping in, stopping, coming out the other side, going for a takedown, trying to basically get Cody to face one way and then attack him from the other.
All that's very difficult against Garbrandt when his reaction is just to recreate space, because essentially all you're doing is just jumping side to side at long range in front. He can see it all. He just creates enough space that every move is obvious. So, anyway.
But essentially, in that round, Cruz just mostly stopped doing that. And all he did was stand at the absolute limit of his range and just throw punches and kicks. He sort of just fought Garbrandt as a much more, like, they were still weird punches and kicks. It's Dominic Cruz, but it worked a lot better because, partially because his big, long drawing pole swings were kind of outside the range of Cody Garbrandt's effective punching range, and because Garbrandt had determined that he was not going to do any of his like blitzing rushes that he might do against an Almeida or something. Yeah. So he just sort of ate quite a few punches. None of them particularly dangerous, but yeah. And so it's a question here. Is that
they don't have to be particularly dangerous, and not just because Garbrandt has like a kind of a questionable chin, but like really, there's the value, the real edge that somebody like TJ Dillashaw has is how good he is at thinking in layers and thinking past or beyond or outside the idea of each individual strike being equally like important and effective. He didn't get focused on making each strike count. I'm trying to think of a good way to express this. Against Garbrandt last time, like he didn't become fixated on making singular strikes work. It was just more about the kind of fight he was forcing Garbrandt to have. Like once Dillashaw, I think, hit upon the idea that he had a very reactive opponent in front of him, unlike for Dominic Cruz, that's a field day for TJ Dillashaw. Give me an opponent who will react to all of my looks, who will constantly have to get out of range, will have to move in response to my kicks, who is waiting for me to make a mistake. Like if I'm TJ Dillashaw, I can make Cody Garbrandt make mistakes all day. He just lets me be in the driver's seat. I think Dillashaw is a much more dangerous matchup, especially given 5 rounds, for anyone who considers themselves a counterpuncher. Much more so than Dominic Cruz. And we've seen that, like in especially in the rematch with like Rafael Sunsao. Yeah. If you wait on a guy like TJ Dillashaw, that is where his particular brand of angles and movement becomes really, really tricky, and he's just going to play games with you. So, yeah, it's still exceptionally dangerous for TJ early, right? Like, Dillashaw's got his problems, and I know he does well in rematches. I think he's also, again, the kind of fighter who I would expect to do well in rematches, but also he got very confident between his first and second fights with Renan Barão. And you do have to wonder, right? Is he going to try to make a statement here against Cody Garbrandt? Is he just enough of the kind of meathead that Cody is to want to kind of engage in his kind of fight for a little bit? Probably.
Oh, you mean I beat this guy trading hooks with him? Yes. I should try trading hooks with him again.
I mean, it's not like he has any lessons on safety to take away from the last fight anyway. He danced on the edge and came out on top. What's to make us think he won't try the same shit again?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about their last fight, for me, is how much it was classic Dillashaw. And by classic Dillashaw, I mean pre-Bang Dillashaw. That was and pre-sort of Cruz-esque Dillashaw. And I think in some ways we've seen this more and more of late. In that around the kind of the Bang and the Barao fights, he did his kind of stance changing, darting right hand, kind of mixing things up, but increasingly, I think in the Lineker, both the Lineker and the Garbrandt fights, he went back to his earliest style, really, which is just mixing up the left head kick and the kind of entry level change thing. I mean, that's it. The earliest form of Dillashaw to me is when he does kind of rear leg head kick, stutter step head kick, or he just kind of does a fake entry into a takedown or a right hand. That's kind of the core of his earliest game, and that was really what he hit on against Garbrandt, is that he was like, if this guy's just going to stand here,
right,
this is my most reliable, like, comfortable mix up from range. Is that he's never going to know quite when my left. I mean, it's a very odd mix up in some ways, right? Normally, you're talking someone who does, at least if they're a left head kick person, it's going to be, you're going to come with the left straight,
right,
a punch which he almost never throws.
Yeah, Dillashaw's southpaw switch is a really interesting thing, actually. Like the way he chooses hits, like his weird right hook and all of that, clearly effective. That's the shot that worked. Yeah,
because it's less about the visual look of, because a lot of the time when you're throwing the rear side power, it's the visual tell, is that you see them winding up, but it's a mixture of a timing and a visual tell with him, because he's got three ways that he throws the head kick. He does the stutter step, he throws it straight, and he does the kind of dipping head kick where it's a fake level change. And when he does that, as he steps forward, he generally throws the right hand, which is either the big right hand or it's that kind of shifting right hook. And yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that he's, as time, I think the idea of him being a stance shifting Cruz-esque kind of sniper fighter has always been overplayed.
Yeah, he's always had a very different application of some admittedly similar moves, but his style has always been his own.
It's also an application that tends to only appear for relatively short periods of time in his fights. Even with, against Barao people, it was mostly one or two entries, and a lot of his time in both fights, particularly the second one, was just buzzsawing Barao from range. From up close, he was just plain out-voluming him.
Oh, Dillashaw in the pocket. I mean, that's the dangerous shit against Garbrandt, but Dillashaw in the pocket is like, it's all about volume in the pocket. His style is in application is so different from Dominic Cruz's. Like, we haven't had this discussion in a while. I think we all got over that comparison a little bit at least, but yeah, like, Dominic Cruz is not using his stance shifting and shit like that to stand in front of you and touch you with 8 pawing jabs in a row while he looks for you to open up for a 3-hit combo. know, it's a very, very different style.
Yeah, and like I said, I feel like now he has kind of moved away. He's moved away from that style even more. I think it's something that he now uses very occasionally as a chance to. I think it's something that if you saw him back in those fights, it was something that I think decayed out of his fights as they went longer. It would be something he would start off doing, his kind of stance switching entries, and he would eventually end up just largely mostly kicking with people. Now I think he's recognized, this is the kind of the raised hand, like lead kick type style. This is still what he's most comfortable with, but he can move in and out of the other style at will. So that's when and it can be very, very tricky. So that was when I think, he really got to Cody, is that he just threw the left head kick mix-ups at a lot of them, and then stepped in with that right hook, and then Cody threw back and briefly completely forgot what stances they were in.
Yeah,
just got knocked out.
Yeah. For that's a great point. For a little while there, like Dillashaw, I guess the transition from that kicking game back to the weird stance switch pocket boxing game with the creative angles and footwork. We've talked about this a few times in the past, Phil, like for various other projects. One of our favorite paradigms, I think, is the Jackson Winklejohn switch up.
Yep.
Where it's, I think you probably describe it better than I do, but essentially it's like, when Travis Brown used to be regarded as like an incredibly impressive young athletic heavyweight. And they were like, wow, with the Mike Winklejohn striking. And what that meant was he would throw a front kick and then he would throw any other kind of kick a few seconds later. And that's essentially the switch up. A switch up which does not require, which does not force you into making a mistake that necessarily allows the next shot to land. It's often just that if you are waiting on it, and if you agree to play the game of, okay, I'm going to try to make specific reactions to each of these moves, and I'm going to wait for the other guy to do those moves, and I'm just going to think about defending myself.
Yeah, it's when someone says right high kick to you.
Yes.
Twice in a row. Are you expecting right high kick to be the next thing that they ask you? And
if so,
and the thing is that Winklejohn striking tends to get beaten rather badly by people who say, you've said a right side technique, and thus I'm just going to pivot in this direction. I'm just going to move in this direction.
Or it's like they throw you right high kick and then they show you like I don't know, a right Superman punch or something. And then it's like, well, what if I can just answer both of them by countering with a straight right?
Yeah.
How effective is the switch up if I just don't play the game? And that's the thing, is that Garbrandt is going to play that game. He is an ideal Jackson Wink opponent. And the older, more Jackson Winkian style of Dillashaw that he reverted to as an adjustment in their first fight, I have a hard time seeing that not being effective again. I just think Dillashaw is a thinking fighter. He is an adapter. It's one of his better abilities, I think. And you can't give him the kind of matchup where he just gets to control the initiative and expect to win that. I mean, granted, Cody Garbrandt could knock him out at any fucking second. Dillashaw is not a great defensive fighter. And he is also going to, in adjusting and in switching things up, as you've noted, like that was when he was effective last time. If Garbrandt's even just a little more prepared for the change-ups, then Dillashaw is going to end up fighting in Garbrandt's range in the kind of exchanges where he got caught and badly hurt last time. But the overall picture of the fight seems like a pretty good one for Dillashaw to me.
So I generally feel the same way. I mean, Dillashaw has shown an exceptional ability to adapt against a very three-dimensional fighter in Rafael Assunção, and an ability to shut out limited fighters as well against, for example, John Lineker. Mm-hmm. Limited but dangerous. So my question is, what if Garbrandt has learned how to jab? Because that is the big question mark for me. Because if he can just learn to jab, I mean, he can jab. This is the thing. On the one or two occasions that he did so in their last fight, it was you could see that it could change the paradigm between the two of them dramatically. Of
course. I mean, there's the thing is the Jackson Wink switch up. We just explained why it's you don't have to play it. Like there's not a lot that Cody Garbrandt has to do differently to not play that game with TJ Dillashaw. Jabbing and feinting, just having more suggested, relatively safe activity to set up the shots would be huge. Because at the very least, you would be giving Dillashaw something to run into, something to react to. You know, like, as a counterpuncher, you want to be proactive. And Garbrandt just adding a jab into this matchup would allow him to be a lot more proactive with his counterpunching. But
it would also just compel Dillashaw that it is just dangerous to stand at mid-range and just throw in kicks and force Garbrandt to either block them and back away.
What better counter than to just step into an incoming kick and jab the guy in the face. I mean, it's a great response to so many attacks. And
you might, and it might draw out the stance shifting, the kind of the dangerous little step in right hands, and that are where he can really hurt Dillashaw.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, it just seems like he's just going to get stranded on the outside.
But don't you think that? I tend to think that the two patient counterpunching is kind of Garbrandt's default mode.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is unfair. I've been surprised by Cody Garbrandt before. I'm not going to count him out, certainly. But I don't necessarily see him as a guy who has that experience in the last fight and says, I need to change the way I fight. I don't know. Until I see Cody Garbrandt make a dramatic change in like how his mind works in the cage, I'm going to expect that after a few exchanges, he is going to default to that mode again, and that Dillashaw is going to take over as the fight goes on.
Right. I mean, it's very difficult to tell with Garbrandt because, I mean, he was literally undefeated before. I mean,
but also one of those fighters who was
professional MMA,
strangely untested. All that.
Yeah, he could just throw a really fast 2-3. And have incredible takedown defense, and that was enough to win him the belt against the best bantamweight, the greatest bantamweight of all time.
Right, super fast hands, incredible timing, and genuinely very good boxing fundamentals in a lot of areas. It's a question of style, stylistic limitations. That's the real difference in this matchup, I think. So, do you have a final pick?
Yeah, I mean it's got to be Dillashaw.
Yeah,
I mean, as we said, we've never seen anything tremendously different from Garbrandt,
right?
And we can't predict that he's gonna. We can't really predict that he's gonna come out any better without having seen it.
We never even seen him in a rematch, which like rematches are weird. We're so used to them, we don't really think about that. But Dillashaw's been in rematches. Dillashaw can adapt to having had a previous experience with an opponent. I don't know that Cody Garbrandt, I have no idea how his brain is going to respond to, I fought this guy before and now he's in front of me again and we're going to find out what we've both learned. I have no idea how he does under those circumstances. So it's still very difficult to say. Garbrandt's one of those fighters. He's an incredible talent, but you do have to wonder, how real is the Gastelum effect? How much depth is there really to Cody Garbrandt, or have we kind of seen what there is to see out of him? I don't know. Not ready to say that yet, but it's certainly on my mind as we await the fight. And with that, why don't we cut this first segment off? When we come back, Demetrius Johnson, Henry Cejudo, yet another rematch, this one for the flyweight crown against the greatest flyweight of all time, arguably the greatest fighter in general of all time, and the man with the most consecutive defenses of his UFC belt. And he's taken on Henry Cejudo, who has been a savage since their last fight. So we are going to come back and talk about that and more after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now, let's get back to it.
Yeah, easily.
Well, welcome back to Heavy Hands, where we're scoffing, looking down our noses with absolute disdain, because this next fight, it's between little guys. You know what that means, folks. It's time for all of us to get pumped up and imagine that we know how to fight. Phil, what kind of terrible things would you do to Demetrius Johnson?
Oh man, just let me tell you,
yeah.
I would run screaming.
I would have a nightmare about the the mighty whiz bar or whatever he called it, and then just think in fear of having to have that name next to my name on Wikipedia after he destroyed me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would flee in a hurry. Well, okay, this is a great fight. It was back when Pat and I previewed the first installment of this matchup, because again, this is another rematch in our 2 rematch championship fights here. I feel like a lot of the things that we said then that made us so excited are finally true now. That's the sort of the unfortunate nature of the flyweight division, because the roster is so small. And yet there are genuinely a decent number of there's quite a bit of parity and quite a few good fighters available for this division. Is that, yeah, everybody fights each other and people get rushed and there is just no time to develop. There is no way to easily develop. You have to be an absolute next level phenom kind of athlete to stand out under these circumstances. And Henry Cejudo has from the beginning looked like that kind of athlete. But that being said, he was still, 3 fights into his UFC career when he fought Demetrius the first time? 4 fights in. 4 fights in.
So. Yeah, so Dustin, and all solid, decent fighters, but yeah.
All solid and good performances, but nothing that really blew you away. It was all of the things that we knew Cejudo was probably capable of that maybe hadn't come out in his fights. Like, oh, we're looking at an Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling. We're looking at legitimately one of the best technical wrestlers in the sport right now. How is he going to compete with Demetrius Johnson's clinch, for example? We found out how. But also, he took Demetrius down very early in it. And also, he's probably more capable than anyone else in this division of stopping Demetrius' takedowns because of that wrestling background. And then we were talking about his fitness and the kind of pace that he can push and the kind of power that he brings to the cage relative to his size. There were a lot of things that made this an interesting and compelling matchup. And I think I feel okay saying, Cejudo just wasn't really ready for it the last time. And I am once again basically in the same place of excitement I was for the first fight. I haven't really gained a ton of excitement because Cejudo got smashed in the first fight. But I've renewed the excitement that I had. I'm now back at the point of, what can Henry Cejudo do? Because we have seen him add to and build on his game in some scary ways in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, this is one of the best athletic matches you can make in the sport. But it's also we've seen Demetrius Johnson against comparable athletes before.
Yeah,
as I think the classic example obviously being John Dodson, but we haven't seen him against someone with an athlete with the kind of brutal competitive mentality of Henry Cejudo, and someone who just will not, assuming you get him angry enough, and assuming you try and make him prove that he is that good, someone who will not accept being second best.
I think I may have already referenced this regarding some fighter last week, but I do get the feeling that if Henry Cejudo burst into tears in the middle of this fight, he would become unbeatable. He's one of those fighters who becomes very powerful when he gets mad, and you can tell. Mad Henry Cejudo is genuinely very effective because he just fights because he's a wrestler, I guess. It just makes him fight hard.
Yeah, and just in terms of his career in general. It was when you could tell he just thought of MMA as just this thing that he was doing, that he was, he was missing weight and he was having to go up to bantamweight, and then he was like, oh no, I'm going to try pretty hard at this thing. I'm going to try pretty hard, but wrestling's still the hardest thing in the world. He said that before their fight. He was like, wrestling is the hardest thing in the world, and now I can punch and kick people, and you could tell that he still thought. Yeah. If I try hard at this, no one can beat me. But then Demetrius Johnson showed him that there was a large gap between the two of them.
There's a huge gap in just in terms of understanding.
Yeah.
It was a real knowledge gap that made the difference in that fight, that Demetrius Johnson was just in control and had so many options he felt were available to him. Cejudo, I think before that fight, had no idea that somebody could make him play catch-up in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see the same thing with guys like Romero and Cormier. Is that I've always gotten the impression from them early in their careers that this is something they do because it's competitive and because it's, it makes them money, and because they're just competitors, and this is available. And as time has gone by, you can see them just getting. You can see them more and more realizing, this is what I want to win at. I really want to win at this. This is what I am. I'm a mixed martial artist now.
There's probably a particular sickness built into the wrestler's mindset, right? Where it's just like the moment something actually becomes hard enough that you can't do it is what makes you love it.
Yep.
For wrestlers. Like, I'm not saying this is how my fucked up brain works, but you can imagine some really fraught relationships in the life of a guy like Henry Cejudo, because clearly the moment he was destroyed by Demetrius Johnson is the moment that he essentially fell in love with MMA and decided he was actually going to be passionately pursuing this. And yeah, not just kind of faffing around, taking it as like the only job available after his real passion was done.
So we mentioned improvements from Cejudo. So what are those?
Well, decisiveness and striking is a real big one. Cejudo has become, in a lot of ways, more technical. He's always been a fairly well-schooled striker, though, I think. He's always thrown pretty good-looking punches, pretty good-looking combinations and kicks. I think he's one of those athletes who just picks things up without having to try hard at all. As soon as he sets his mind to learning a technique, he seems to get it. But the execution, the style of Henry Cejudo has undergone a pretty tremendous transformation. And maybe you could say more than one. Because like the Wilson Hayes fight did not look identical to the Joseph Benavidez fight. Granted, Hayes responded to the Henry striking a lot differently than Joseph did. Joseph had, as you were saying, his like last hurrah moment where he just fought his ass off to stay in that fight the entire way through. But the tactics that Cejudo is using now are like counterpunching, short, restricted combinations, and seems to be really focusing on doing damage. Not so much like staying busy and putting his shots together, but landing with precision at the perfect moment. That's certainly what came through in both the Pettis and the Hayes fights.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a transformation from just a cardio and volume approach to being much more of a power striker.
It was sort of like an imprecise approach overall before, wasn't it? It was like a Mark Henry type of thing without any of the particulars. Where Henry, I think maybe because he was such a good wrestler and such a good athlete, maybe he did think like, I'll do fine at this if I just like, you keep your hands up. Yeah, you throw the 1, 2, 3, you put the punches together. It was very workmanlike before. And that is what has gone away. It's not workmanlike. It's not based on just having a good like gamesmanship to your style. It's clearly more now about being a fucking good fighter. About knowing how to pick your shots, knowing how to create openings, and knowing how to capitalize on them. He looked really scary against Wilson Hayes, Phil. I mean, he looked very scary.
Yeah, I felt very bad for Wilson Hayes. It felt like he was unfortunately trapped in a who can style on this guy the most competition between Johnson and Cejudo.
And then John Moraga beat him. I mean, the guy can't catch a fucking break. Yeah, flyweight's a very tough place to survive. So yeah, I think it's like a stylistic change. There's also a mentality change like that comes along with that. There is not going to be a moment, I don't think, in this first round where Cejudo is surprised by something that happens to him in the same way he was last time. Guaranteed, Demetrius Johnson will still find some things to surprise him. But to borrow a cliche, I would describe their last fight as a rude awakening for Henry. Yes. I really think he experienced... Yeah, he
can surprise him, but he won't shock him.
Exactly. He experienced the first few exchanges, the first few clinch tie-ups. He had the takedown, and then Demetrius Johnson very quickly got out of it. And I think was overawed and was more reactive than he will be this time around because of that. But that's the thing, is that Demetrius Johnson, I don't know. What do you make of Demetrious Johnson's game these days? I mean, how does he match up with that kind of style? Have we seen him face somebody with this new approach? I guess John Dodson is the best comparison.
Yeah, I mean, that's the closest comparison. So, and that's the thing, is that how much does Demetrious Johnson's approach depend on being... How much does Demetrious Johnson's pressure style, more specifically, depend on him being the more dominant wrestler?
We are, because we're probably looking at pressure from Demetrious, right? I mean, we have for a while now, I think, been suspecting, or if not outright saying, that is probably his most comfortable way of fighting. That's what he wants to default to. And Cejudo's new style is the kind that will invite pressure. He's going to allow Demetrious to take the initiative.
Yeah, he's definitely focusing more on, he wants an open stance, he wants long range, he wants to throw the power hand and the body kick. And so, yeah, I mean, the question is, how does Demetrious Johnson, how well can he pressure without getting takedowns? And if he's not the better wrestler, it's an interesting question, because we've seen him get hit he has been taken down by counter takedowns, throughout his MMA career as he's come forward.
Even against Cejudo, that dominant 2 minutes of fighting, he still did give up a takedown. Yeah.
So the question is, and when he pressured against Johnson, a lot of it wasn't necessarily just the kicks or the punches. It was the fact that he was able to go into the clinch and then go to the single leg and just kind of shift back and forth between these phases. So that won't be available here. The advantage, I think, that Johnson has is still Cejudo's defense, which is sort of not really there. Apart from movement, I would say, he's very quick on his feet, but he does not move his head tremendously well.
He does not move his substantial head.
Yeah, I mean,
off the center line.
To be fair, that may just be an energy conservation tactic.
Slipping is exhausting when your head is as big as Henry Cejudo's.
He might be an Olympian.
He's got 30. 30 pounds of hair alone. I mean, be easy on the guy. Yeah, it's always the thing that like, no matter how phenomenal you look in terms of your striking skills, you can't pick up defense like that, because defense requires feel. Defense requires experience to really understand. And I wouldn't say that Demetrious Johnson has great striking defense himself, but he's going to be...
It's the weakest part of his game.
Yeah, but he is going to be given the kind of fight... I mean, this is, in a lot of ways, sort of similar to the Garbrandt-Dillashaw one. Like Dillashaw, Mighty Mouse is comfortable pressuring. He will fall into that if you give him that kind of fight. Like Garbrandt, or like Dillashaw, even much more so than Dillashaw, Mighty Mouse is all about the adjustments and the progression. That thing I was talking about before about, like, when you watch Nate Diaz box Michael Johnson, you can see these nice systematic moves, and you're like, okay, this guy has worked with boxers. You can just tell the way that he builds and progresses from one technique to the next, from finding his range to using it to creating the counters to countering the counters. Everything's very by the book. It's all just like, it's instinct. And that is how Demetrious Johnson is with every single phase of fighting, is that he instinctively understands how one thing creates the opening for another. His mind is working in a very different way to the vast majority of other fighters, in how calmly he just sort of makes decisions and adapts no matter what's happening to him. And we have seen this. This is still the case when he's in serious trouble. When he's really hurt or surprised or caught in a really deep submission. We've seen plenty of scary moments, even over the course of just his flyweight championship run, and he has always adapted very well. I'm imagining in this matchup that he is going to hit upon a particular position that he just likes, and he is going to be comfortable chipping away. I think very similar to the Dodson fight, we may see him, because I don't think, knowing that Cejudo is good in the clinch, blah, 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 it obviously didn't mean shit to him last time. Cejudo's skill set is not going to convince Demetrious Johnson to at least not try. to do all of his usual stuff. I kind of have a feeling we are going to see him unable to take Cejudo down, but that being exactly the kind of circumstance that does not dissuade him. And holding onto a single leg, chipping away, controlling Cejudo, making him work. I still think we're probably looking at a generous stamina advantage for Demetrious Johnson down the stretch, given how much power Cejudo likes to throw. I mean, he's in great shape and is a very good athlete, but Demetrious Johnson is going to be given the kind of fight where he just gets to steer. And I'm not sure how Henry Cejudo, unless he gets Demetrious Johnson to make exactly the perfect mistake, how is he going to adapt and create layers past the first few exchanges? Like what, you know what I mean? This is not Wilson Hayes he's fighting here. This is a guy who is very comfortable with all the phases of MMA.
So this is the thing, is that Cejudo has tended to just either win his fights or just lose them. He's rarely tended to, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
Within the context of the fight itself, he's generally either just the thing that he's come out, the plan that he's come out with at the beginning has either worked or it hasn't. It's rare that we've seen, real kind of subtle positional adjustments, or for him to move to one, for him to have one tactic and change to another. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the exception to this is the Sergio Pettis fight, but that is also not that encouraging from his perspective, because it illustrated something, which is that his newfound striking style has limitations.
Yeah.
And that was against a pressure kickboxer who was going to essentially just move into range with better footwork than him and kind of lay down short combinations without overcommitting too much. And you kind of saw that his striking style didn't hold up well against that, because it was mostly around having... It's a very athletic striking style. Mm-hmm. Is that he needs range, and he needs to kind of explode across it with that big right hand or the body kick. And that if he was up against someone who could throw... If someone who was throwing short shots, who was taking, an angle off to the side before he was throwing, who was consistently in the pocket without overreacting, you could see there was a major problem there.
Yeah.
And he was able to overcome it with takedowns, but it's a Pettis brother.
Right. A style matchup in which he had a decided wrestling advantage. Like a very clear one, and that's not going to be the case against Demetrious Johnson. And the inability to adapt, to change up your own way of fighting, I think is probably quite strongly tied to the opponent being able to have an easier time adapting against you. Like Cejudo has this really athletic bearing, this really athletic style where, he just feels like he's playing a different game than you, or at a different speed. He's waiting, he's looking for the opportunity. He lands the shot, or whatever. He lets the shot go that he's been waiting for. What happens after that moment is the big difference between somebody like Cejudo and somebody like Demetrious Johnson. Whether or not that shot lands, Demetrious Johnson is going to continue swimming. He's going to continue moving forward and progressing. Henry Cejudo is the kind of fighter who will, whether he lands that shot or not, will spend a good half second there experiencing himself missing and or landing that shot, waiting for the next opportunity. I don't think relying on that first athletic step to really be the difference between you and your opponent is especially risky against Demetrious Johnson, because he is going to have many, many steps. Whether they're prepared ahead of time or not, it's difficult to tell how the man's brain works. But he is going to be able to go to other routes, to other options. He's going to keep thinking. His brain isn't going to shut off like, okay, I've accomplished my goal. He knows there are layers to fighting, and he is going to be looking for those layers from the beginning. So I think, it's, no surprise. We're picking a Demetrious Johnson fight. That's the unfortunate truth, is that there is a genuine difficulty in trying to get people invested in these fights, because he just never loses. But this is the best Henry Cejudo we've seen. And Cejudo was already one of the most exciting matchups with Demetrius Johnson when they fought the first time around. So sticking with Mighty Mouse, I think he's going to outthink and outsmart Henry Cejudo like he does everybody else. But I'm pretty excited for it.
I'm interested to see a bunch of things. I'm interested to see how the wrestling plays out. I want to see if we have seen, it's been a semi-consistent weakness of Mighty Mouse. Not really against some people, to be honest. He was able to, for example, Ali Bagatinov didn't really get anything done, but Tim Elliott, Dominic Cruz, it's not something that's completely gone away over time. But I'm interested to see like how these two trade body kicks, because these are two of the best body kickers in the lighter weight classes. But yeah, in the end, I just think DJ just has more of an ability to go 2-3 strikes deep in a combination and not lose his head and start swinging.
Yeah, whether or not he sees that stuff ahead of time.
He can tap and build just better than Cejudo does. Cejudo is... It's not an insecurity about his fighting, but it's definitely I'm going to scare you off no matter what happens kind of mentality. Whereas Demetrius Johnson is not looking to scare you off or to prove anything. He's just looking to win.
Yeah, he fights like he's playing like Dance Dance Revolution. Yeah. He's just watching as all the little arrows come down the screen, and he's just ready for each one. The moment comes to step, his foot's in the right fucking place. And that's not Henry Cejudo. So DJ all the way, baby. I don't know if there's anything else from this card we do want to talk about. I suppose we should decide concretely. Are we going to come back in the next segment and talk about Cub Swanson and Hinata Moicano, Phil, or do we just want to move on to recapping last week's card?
I'm not sure.
Well, how about this? We'll take a break. When we come back, if we don't return and discuss Cub Swanson versus Hinata Moicano, and that upsets you, it's Phil's fault. And if you are glad that we're moving on to UFC Calgary, you have me to thank. We'll be back after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. All right, just briefly.
Yeah.
Just briefly. Okay. Well, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're going to get on to the recap from Calgary. Dustin Poirier, Eddie Alvarez 2 in the main event. Jose Aldo versus Jeremy Stephens in the co-main. But starting with the main event, Poirier Alvarez 2. Anything surprise you at all about this matchup, Phil?
Yes. I thought this was like the Stephens... Both this and the Stephens-Aldo fight, I felt, were underratedly good performances by the people who lost it. And what I was thinking is, looking at Eddie's performance, is that I was thinking, is this the anti-Conor game plan? And he's now actually comfortable enough to make it work a bit better?
Seemed kind of like it, right?
Yeah, because it felt a lot like, looking at it, I was like, oh yeah, this is, and now I kind of see like where you could have gone with that, because I was thinking about this fight beforehand, and after we'd been talking about it, and just percolating for a while, I was still thinking, I don't know how Alvarez can win this fight.
Right.
I don't know what his approach weapons are. I don't know I don't really know how I would assemble his game in order to beat Dustin Poirier. Aside from, people just going like, well, all he has to do is just survive and then turn the fight round, which is honestly a bad idea. Like that's not how anyone should look to.
Not a sustainable way of fighting, to say the least.
Yeah, and it's just that like you're going to become dumb when you get hit, and you're going to become tired, and it's just it's rarely a good idea. But I think this was a good performance. I was genuinely impressed. We saw several pieces of the game plan, and admittedly, a lot of these were things which ended up getting him destroyed in the end. But it was functional and it made sense, and it was stay mobile, don't get sniped, don't just stand in front of him. Stay mobile. When you have to throw in combination, and go for attrition.
Low kicks, body shots, wrestling, all huge factors in the first round of this fight.
And you could see both of them. I think both of these guys used weapons that they'd trained for other fighters. So I think we saw a lot of reactive. We saw a few reactive level changes from Eddie in response to left hands, and we saw from Poirier counter left hands to leg kicks.
Just like the Gaethje fight.
Yeah. So like both of these guys, you saw them using weapons they'd learned for other people. But in the end, I just think the thing is that at this point, Dustin Poirier is just both a bad matchup and sort of just a better fighter than Eddie Alvarez.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm happy about this result for Poirier. Like, I think he has arrived, essentially.
Yep.
I've been kind of waiting for it for a while, and I'm sure he has too. He's been a top level fighter almost since his career began. Was not that long into his career before he was a top 10 featherweight in the UFC, and has been right around that area ever since. But yeah, the story of Dustin Poirier's career for the last few years has been progression, trying to change his style in the face of, if this is the UFC. So in the face of a string of matchups that are not at all forgiving for a guy who is trying to change his style, like trying to change things up against the likes of Eddie Alvarez and Justin Gaethje and even Jim Miller. Like, it's dangerous shit. Even going back to like Joe Duffy and Yancy Medeiros, like these are guys who will shock you. Bobby Green, like shit, he has not fought easy opponents. It's lightweight. And it's been a lot of matchups where he has been just kind of dancing on that line. He's had a hard time taking that committed step from brawler to what I believe he is now, my favorite style, boxer puncher. Everyone knows I love that phrase. But that's what he is now. Is like he now he retains a lot of the confidence in his hands, the power, the willingness to exchange. But I mean, what I really want to talk about with this matchup with Dustin is how well he walked the line, especially for the finishing sequence, right? Because despite the great adjustments that Eddie did make, it did end up being this sort of matchup where it's like, okay, Eddie's going to get hurt. He got hurt.
So, but it was also, I think it was for Poirier. It was a lot about him having just confidence that his game was going to work, because you can see he still gets mad about the things that happen to him, but it's no longer. He gets this thing where he'll like miss a left hand or something, and you can see him just take a deep breath and purse his lips.
He gets Johnny Hendricks face for a moment where he's like,
but you can then see him immediately just go, no, this is fine. And so in the end, it was Eddie's weapons that got him, that he picked for the fight that got him killed. It was he threw, after they got stood up from the foul, he threw a raw leg kick and got countered with the left hand.
Yep.
And then he tried to throw a predictive level change to get under the left hand and just went straight into a step knee.
A savage knee to the chest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, as you were saying, the finishing sequence. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, you're fine. I mean, it was just the question was when Dustin hurts Eddie, is he going to be able to not brawl, right? And I think it's becoming more and more clear with time. The reason Dustin Poirier brawls, the reason that is his tendency, is not because it's what he's best at or comfortable doing. It's because he's uncomfortable that he brawls, because he feels pressure or anxiety or insecurity of some kind. He feels like he has to brawl rather than that he wants to. That is my read. And there are like more and more big moments in his fights where you can see him having that moment where he has to decide to chill the fuck out. He did it against Gaethje when he got hurt. He got put against the fence, and instead of going nuts swinging back, you could just see him like take a calming breath and count to 10. and then he just sort of circled off and went back to trying to control the pace. Likewise here, he ended up against the fence in some bad spots, stayed very calm and composed. But when he hurt Eddie, there was just enough more patience to his style that it made the difference. He did not go in there. He had a couple of bouts swinging like 6-7 punches in a row, alternating hands, his head right there in the center. And you could see Eddie was just waiting for that big counter to come through. But Dustin was also touching Eddie a lot more. He wasn't committing fully to all of his shots. So, like, after the knee and the combo that sent Eddie retreating, the shots he was landing were not super powerful. They were mostly just prodding left hands that backed Eddie up into the fence. And then once he got Eddie there, he would touch him and then roll under the counters and come back with his combinations. He was just a little less urgent to get the finish, and it was more than enough to make the difference. He didn't put himself in undue risk. He had a badly hurt fighter in front of him. He still went for the finish, but it was like, I don't know, it was like playing whack-a-mole. He wasn't stressed. Yeah. He was just like, okay, his head's going to be here, hit it with this shot. Okay, he moves away from this shot, hit it with this follow-up. It was like playing a game rather than being in a fucking fight for his life, and it made all the difference.
Yeah, he didn't wait for him to recover or anything like that. He was just like, how do I just put a continuous stream of offense on this guy while never overcommitting enough that he's going to draw me into anything?
Yeah, and you don't have to put all of your rage into each shot. It's better if you just poke him, like you're still working, but because you're not like emotionally involved in the punches you're throwing, you can just watch how he's reacting to them and then set him up for the really emotional punches. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's just been great to see Dustin Poirier improve this much, because if you'd told me that he'd be, fighting for a title or, getting to that kind of position in the lightweight division, being what it is, I would have said, sure, that's totally possible. It just would have been him just doing it through pure cannonade offense. Just him just going out there and just fucking people up in the same kind of high risk, high reward way that he always did. But the fact that he's been doing it with this kind of mixture of pressure and outfighting style, the fact that he's been doing it with actual defense, he's that double forearm guard actually does stuff now. He actually lets shots bounce off it and then comes back.
He doesn't use it stupidly.
He's got different types of the forearm guard.
Yeah.
He's got the high elbow kind of tri-star type thing. He's just so much better than I could have hoped that he would be. And that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. A little positivity from Dustin Poirier. Eddie Alvarez still looking like Eddie Alvarez, like no shame on him. And it was a hell of a performance from both guys. He fought a very smart fight. I do want to say, we have to mention very briefly the foul. The fouls from Eddie.
Yeah.
People get really worked up about this shit. Like, people get really worked up. There's also a strong contingent online who remains convinced that Daniel Cormier is a false champion because he happened to poke Stipe Miocic in the eye. So people love to get worked up and focused on fouls. I just want to say this is my not particularly unique position. Fighters foul, and I don't generally give that much of a shit. If it's really blatant, like, yes, okay, I'll admit, I was disappointed in the leech when he dug his entire hand into the eye socket of Jake Matthews. That's a little too far. That's why I'm like, okay, you are going beyond gamesmanship. You're doing something that is wrong. But also, like, the holding on to the fence to avoid getting submitted? What, am I supposed to be upset at Eddie for doing that?
But it's really... what's great about this one is that it's people getting outraged because their dude fouled someone and it was It was like, and they got punished too hard.
Yes,
that's the weird one. Is that normally you'll get like, oh, Jose Aldo held defense against Chad Mendes. He would have given up that takedown and been destroyed from top position as he that's things that happened to him.
This is Jose Aldo fans.
Like, this dude held onto the fence, gave the other guy a wet willy, and then threw like 2 consecutive 12-6 elbows, and then he had his position taken away, and that's why he lost.
And if he hadn't done all of those, it's sort of akin to 9 out of 10 times I don't knock myself out. you know, it's like, well, who are you really blaming at that point for how this thing turned out?
Yeah, what do you think was really was Eddie gonna submit him?
I was more just
What was going to
disappointed.
happen in that position by the cage in that remaining however long there was in that round?
That one 12-6 elbow, I was just like, that's bad, Dendasso. That's just, it's just not, like, Mark Goddard's right there. He's looking. You know, like, you're going to cheat that don't do it so blatantly. Just be a little subtle about it.
I mean, he obviously just didn't know. Like,
that's also embarrassing. And also, Mark Henry didn't know, which is a little humiliating, I think, that Mark Henry was, in fact, I'll say this, you can see Mark Henry telling him to throw that elbow in the corner.
I know, it's a bummer.
Yeah, so everything's...
It's a bummer. You know, if it had gone the other way around, people would have been like, imagine if Eddie had come back, there would have been just a ton of people screaming about how he'd escaped the guillotine by holding onto the fence. So
absolutely.
And they would have had, in all honesty, probably slightly more of a case.
Well, despite Eddie's fouls, Dustin's win is also permanently sullied because he kneed Eddie right in the dick when he was finishing him.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just, everything's tainted, everything is stained and marred. There's nothing perfect and good in this MMA world. So it's fine. I'm used to it. Everything sucks after the fact, and, you know, nobody's wins count anymore. It's fine. Let's talk about Jose Aldo. He had some pressure on him, Philip. He lost both of his last two fights to Max Holloway, got knocked out, and it was very, very clear before this point that he was continuing to decline in small but impossible to ignore ways. Notably in the Holloway fight was how much more he seemed to control his pace in the second one without managing to avoid getting tired. The fight, it didn't seem to change anything materially in terms of how the fight actually played out. And so now we're looking at Aldo coming in here against Jeremy Stephens. Now, of course, people are saying that Stephens is a bum because, like, revisionism is extremely powerful in MMA. And once you lose badly to someone, like once you get finished by somebody, it's clearly you never could have finished them in the first place. But Jeremy Stephens is like, he's been on a tear lately. And yeah, it's been against Duha Choya and Josh Emmett, but these have also been wins based on good adjustments and good, like, fundamentally tight fighting. And we've seen more and more of that out of Jeremy Stephens in these latter days of his career. And he is, of course, a big puncher, very durable, and more and more competent with his techniques in the clinch, or in the pocket. So very dangerous counterpunching, the kind of stuff that I could see really surprising a fighter like Aldo. What did you make of how Aldo approached Jeremy Stephens? And also, at some point, we will mention that he ripped Jeremy Stephens' liver out of his body and stomped on it in front of a bloodthirsty audience. So we will talk about the finish. But how did Aldo approach Stephens? Do you think it was the correct choice? How did he look? Just general impression of the...
He won, so yeah.
Yeah.
So this was an interesting one when we looked back at how we were talking about this fight beforehand, because the question we were asking ourselves and everyone was asking themselves was, can Jeremy Stephens draw a brawl out of Jose Aldo?
Mm-hmm.
And the question everyone kept asking themselves was whether he could do that, and the question we never really considered was whether he should do that.
Does he want to bring out angry Jose Aldo?
Yeah.
The thing is it was easy to forget that is still a question worth asking, right? Like, now we have seen people tactically solve the classic Aldo counter brawl. And I think it had caused a lot of us to forget that has been a staple aspect of his game for almost his entire career, because it's incredibly fucking effective. He's actually really good at standing his ground and forcing somebody to exchange with him and scaring them or hurting them badly in the process.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that Jose Aldo's first line of defense is incredibly difficult to crack. And he throws punches very quickly and very cleanly. And if you're going to just fight him in a single strike pecking attack from the outside, he can literally, as for example, or with only one attack, as for example, you know, Frankie Edgar kind of did, he's literally going to just be able to stop that all day.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about that allowed, like, Max Holloway to take advantage of Jose Aldo's tendency that if you get past his layers of defense, he will just literally try and shove you back out of there as hard as he can.
Yeah.
Is that Max Holloway has very, very good defense, and he has very good defense at all times.
And good passive defense in the form of long arms and height as well.
Yeah. And Stevens is a very large featherweight, but he is not a what I would class as a defensively robust fighter. Let's say. With him saying that, we saw beforehand that he was saying, like, Jose relies on his chin as his defense. You're like, of these two fighters...
I just imagine Jeremy Stevens as an angry dog looking in the mirror, and, like, Eric Del Fierro tells him he's looking at Jose Aldo, and so he just starts plotting what he's going to do to this bastard, and just sees all of his own faults in Aldo.
Yeah. So basically, what we saw was I thought Stevens did a very good job. Much like Alvarez against Poirier, he came with a game plan which he came up against a very, very hard style matchup, and he came with a good game plan in that he didn't throw his early shots. He didn't overcommit to them too much. He threw, prodding jabs. He had a very nice sequence, I thought, earlier on, where he threw a throwaway left jab, which he does occasionally do, but then came behind it with a throwaway right hand, which he almost never does, and just used it to grab the clinch and knee Aldo. And I was like, wow, that's pretty subtle, Jeremy.
The setups, the subtlety of Jeremy Stevens' game has, again, I don't want people to miss this just because he got lost here. And if you're like, oh, the hype train's dead, it's Jeremy Stevens isn't, in fact, improving as a fighter. He is. He showed a lot of those things. He's got a very good jab, actually. It's quite quick and powerful, and the fact that he's willing to both use it the way you would expect him to, as a slugger's jab, where you jab and he just jabs whenever you do so he can smash you and assume that his is going to be more powerful. But also, that he can throw it away and can feint it and understands like what its purpose is beyond scoring attritional damage.
But yeah, so we saw that, Aldo's style works a bit better against sort of very quick step-ins of the Mendes and Edgar variety blitzes than it does against someone who will just patiently walk into range, because his pivots and his head movement and his parries and so on, if you just walk into range on them, he will, you can get him to react to one thing and then throw with another. Very difficult, but not impossible. And Stevens did that once or twice, and I think he managed to clip Aldo. As Aldo overreacted to something, he managed to clip him with an uppercut and then have some success against the cage. And then Aldo just decided. And similarly, we were talking about Duho Choi and Cub Swanson. Aldo, I think, realized this guy really isn't that good. If he either knew it through tape study or he knew it through the fight, and he realized this guy isn't good moving backwards.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you continue that sentence. He realized this guy isn't good.
This guy isn't good.
Wait a minute. This dude fucking sucks. And then he knocked him out. No, yeah. He absolutely realized that. There's a clear moment in this fight, like after that flurry, and rewatching it, Aldo wasn't like rocked. No. He wasn't really in a very dire position as some were thinking during the fight itself, and as it did kind of seem during the fight itself. He was in a wild and dangerous exchange. He was in a risky position with a fighter like Jeremy Stevens. But it's clear that he resolved right after that moment, where after he defended himself, he was like, okay, now Jeremy Stevens is jabbing me. He's getting me to react to it, and now he's starting to set things up off of it. Now my only reaction to his jab is going to be to push forward after every single one he throws.
Yeah.
So now
every punch was countered pretty much after that point.
Yeah, and always by something advancing.
Well.
Yeah, but always something advancing. And he didn't he was like the things you are probably talking about when you say that he did look slower in this matchup. His head movement, he was there. He was getting hit by the jabs a lot. He was not getting his head out of the way, but a strategic choice made that irrelevant, because even when he was eating the jabs, he was advancing behind them and coming back to threaten Stevens, and that immediately threw Stevens off his game. It put him into
and at least and the thing is that he would eat the jab, but almost every time Stevens was losing 2 out of 3 of every exchanges at the very least, and he wasn't sure what was coming back at him either. So Aldo was jabbing with him. He was throwing the right hand. He was throwing a couple of varieties of right hand over the top. He came with the one, and then as soon as Stevens became unsure of whether he could throw, and then Aldo just came with the 1-2, and then the body shot combination which finished it.
Yeah, and it was probably the most brutal left hand to the body Jose Aldo himself has ever thrown.
Yeah, that was
absolutely savage.
Disgusting.
Disgusting's a good word.
I loved it.
Disgusting's a good word. I watched the finish again late last night. I was a little intoxicated at the time, Phil. I'm not afraid to admit that. And I watched it. And I was struck by how upsetting it was. I was like, oh yeah, I've seen this already 5 times. I was so hyped for Aldo. This is the first time I watched it, and it just wrung all of this sympathy for Jeremy Stevens out of me, because his face, he's so unhappy when he gets hit in the liver. He wants nothing more than to just be dead at that moment. And you can tell, a really, really savage finish from Aldo. He's still Jose Aldo. He's past the point of making dramatic stylistic changes. I think that's pretty clear. But a nice reminder of how the vast majority of styles match up with Jose Aldo. Yes, was he a little slower, a little this? Yeah. Does he still look more or less like Jose Aldo? He does to me.
Yeah. Also, please just go to lightweight.
Yeah, why not, dude?
The thing is, I've heard Zane and so on suggest Aldo Pettis, and I'm fine with that. But I honestly just think that Aldo would just wreck him. It's not that. What I would like to see is Aldo Alvarez. I want to see Aldo Alvarez. I think that would be cool. And neither of them really have much of a route back to the belts of their respective divisions, assuming then let's hope that Max Holloway is okay. But I feel like that would be an awesome fight. And
they both resort to throwing down under pressure. That sounds like a great matchup.
Yeah.
But it won't happen. I mean, let's not get our hopes up, because he will not go. Just like Joanna refuses to go to strawweight, or to go to flyweight. But anyway, congrats, Aldo. I love you, buddy. It felt so good to see Aldo. I was completely sympathetic to his overwhelming emotions after that finish, because it was so good to see him just to get a win back again. Yeah. It sucks.
It was such a relief, and it was such a great win. It was like I think I said on Twitter, it wasn't the prettiest. It wasn't just like he clinically just outskilled him like he did Frankie Edgar. He was just like, oh, you're going to hit me, are you? I am going to fuck you up. And then he did it.
Viscerally satisfying. And that's pretty much all I think we really want to talk about from this card. The undercard was not bad. There were some good performances and quite a bit of stuff.
What's it called? Old person lightweight fight was great.
Which one's that? McDessie Pearson.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic.
I have yet to see it. Isn't that embarrassing?
You are a...
It's one of the only undercards.
Shame to journeyman watchers everywhere.
And it's like the fight I was most excited about in this undercard. I'm still going to watch it.
Fucking great.
I'm just waiting for the right moment.
It's really good. It's really subtle, and just like they throw tons of different things, and it's much better than you could have thought. It's not just McDessie just jabbing Pearson from range, and they both come up with solutions. And
no, it was always going to be good.
McDessie wins pretty clearly, but it's actually it's much better than I thought it was going to be.
It was always going to be good. Look at even as recently as Ross Pearson's fight with Chad Laprise. Like you give either Ross Pearson or John McDessie somebody who will engage in a fairly patient but kickboxing battle with plenty of engagements. They are going to have a fun ass close fight. Always. I'm thinking of like John McDessie, Darren Cruikshank, Ross Pearson, Edson Barboza, going back way through these guys' careers.
Well, it wasn't terribly close, but it was
Well,
it was competitive.
Yeah.
It was competitive throughout, and it's great. Like it's definitely worth watching. And
Ross is
neither
clearly
man shames himself at all. It's just like, yeah, Ross is someone who I feel like if he's going to fight at all, it should just be at welterweight. He's just too slow for.
Yeah, I mean, why? Why not?
Yeah, he's just too slow for lightweights like McDessie at this point.
Yeah.
But no, it's really fun and definitely
Okay.
and you are a shame to your tribe for not having watched it.
I'm just waiting for the right moment. Okay, I have to have candles lit, music on. I have to have the right atmosphere before I sit down to enjoy this instant classic. So it'll be coming probably this evening. But that pretty much does it for us here on this episode of Heavy Hands. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all very much for listening. Check out our Patreon. There will be some bonus footage from this episode. I'm not 100% sure yet which fights we actually cut out, but we talked about more fights than you just heard if you're listening to the main episode this week. So go over to our Patreon, check out our bonus episode in which we will, either be recapping or previewing or something. But don't miss it. And find us on social media if you have questions, comments, or concerns. I think Twitter is the best way for both of us. You can find Phil on there at Evil Greg Jackson. And you can find me at Boxing Bush, that's BUSCH. And check out both of our works, various works on BloodyElbow.com. The Patreon, the iTunes, the telling your friends. I think we've covered pretty much all the important points. So thank you all again for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.